So, let me ask you something. Have you ever heard of an empire that lasted for 1,000 years, but wasn't technically Roman or holy, and wasn't really a single empire? Sounds like a riddle, right? Well, today we're going to unravel that mystery and dive into one of the most complicated and important players in European history, the Holy Roman Empire. Here's our game plan. First, we'll look at how this whole thing even got started. Then, we'll get into the big power struggles. We'll also see what daily life was like for regular people, check out the awesome knights and castles, and finally, wrap up with why this ancient empire still has an impact on us today. All right, let's set the scene. The original, legendary Roman Empire had crumbled, leaving Europe kind of messy and broken up into a bunch of smaller, warring kingdoms. But the idea of that old Roman power and unity, well, that was an idea that was just too powerful to forget. Now, just look at that time gap. We're talking more than 300 years after Rome fell. A seriously powerful king, Charlemagne, decided he was the one to bring that glory back. And get this, on Christmas Day, in the year 800, the Pope placed a crown on his head and called him emperor. This was a huge deal, a deliberate move to link his new rule directly to the legacy of ancient Rome.
But it's super important you don't picture this as a single country with neat borders like we see on maps today. Oh no. A much better way to think of it is like a giant, sprawling patchwork quilt, stitched together from hundreds of different territories, kingdoms, duchies, free cities, all loosely held together under one emperor.
And that brings us to the biggest, most dramatic question of the entire empire, one that caused arguments and even wars for centuries. The question was simple: who really had the final say? This all boiled down to a massive power struggle between the two most powerful people in Europe. Okay, so in one corner, you have the emperor. He's the top military dog, the guy with the armies, seen as the protector of the Christian world. But in the other corner, you have the Pope, the head of the powerful Catholic Church. And here's the catch: the Pope was the only person who could officially crown the emperor. You can see the problem, right? They were constantly battling over who was in charge of things like appointing bishops or collecting taxes. And here's something that made the Holy Roman Empire totally different from other kingdoms at the time. The top job wasn't just passed down from father to son. Nope. The emperor was actually elected. A small, exclusive group of the most powerful princes and archbishops, called the electors, would get together and vote on who the next ruler would be. As you can imagine, this led to some seriously intense political games. So getting to be emperor was a whole process. First, you had to win that all-important election to be chosen as king. But that was just step one. You weren't officially the Holy Roman Emperor until you made the long and sometimes pretty dangerous journey all the way to Rome so the Pope himself could crown you. This whole system gave the Pope and those powerful nobles a ton of influence. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the people at the top. But what about the millions of other people? The ones who lived and worked and built this empire? Let's zoom in a bit and see how their world was put together. The entire society was organized by something called the feudal system. The easiest way to picture it is like a giant pyramid. Everybody had a specific place in a specific job, and the whole thing was held together by a system of exchanging loyalty and service for land and protection. Right at the very peak of the pyramid, you've got the emperor. Just below him are the big-shot lords, the dukes and counts, who controlled huge chunks of land. In return for that land, they promised the emperor soldiers for his armies. And who were those soldiers? The knights. And then, at the very bottom, the massive base of the whole pyramid, you had the peasants and serfs. They were the ones who worked the land and grew the food for literally everyone else. So for the vast majority of people, life was, well, it was small, and it was hard. You were probably born in a tiny village, you'd spend your entire life working the fields that belonged to a local lord, and there was a good chance you'd never, ever go further than 10 miles from your home. Your whole world was dictated by the seasons and just plain hard work. Okay, now let's get into the stuff we all picture when we think about this time period. We're talking knights in shining armor, huge stone castles, and the towns and cities that were just starting to pop up and grow. Being a knight was definitely not for the faint of heart. A full suit of steel armor could weigh over 50 pounds. That's like trying to fight with a big bag of dog food strapped to your body. These guys were the elite, professional warriors of their day, and their job was incredibly physically demanding. Now, to keep these powerful warriors in line, there was a special code of conduct called chivalry. And it wasn't just about being polite or having good manners. It was a serious warrior's code that demanded things like courage in battle, total loyalty to your lord, and protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. And where did these knights and lords live? In castles, of course. But these weren't just fairy tale homes. They were incredible military fortresses, engineered to be almost impossible to attack. At the very same time, though, people were also building these absolutely massive Gothic cathedrals with unbelievably high ceilings and beautiful stained glass windows as these huge symbols of their religious faith. Now, as things in the empire got a little more stable, life really started to change. Trade just exploded. Merchants started traveling farther, selling more goods, and all this activity turned sleepy little villages into busy towns and then into real cities. Craftspeople formed groups called guilds to protect their trades, and the whole economy started to grow and thrive. An empire that sticks around for 1,000 years doesn't just vanish without a trace. So let's talk about why it finally came to an end and what kind of mark it left on the world that we all live in right now. If you look closely, the empire's greatest weakness was actually built right into its DNA. It was this constant, massive tug of war. The emperor was always pulling in one direction, trying to get more centralized power, and the hundreds of local princes were all pulling back, fighting hard to stay independent. This endless internal conflict made the empire really, really hard to govern. And yet, despite all its problems, it survived for 1,006 years. Just think about that number for a second. It officially started with Charlemagne back in 800, and it lasted all the way until 1806, when Napoleon finally broke it up. That's an absolutely mind-boggling amount of time. So, why does any of this matter today? Because its legacy is literally all around us. That messy patchwork of territories eventually helped form the borders of modern countries like Germany, Italy, and Austria. Its weird election system was actually an early, distant relative of some democratic ideas. Many of Europe's greatest cities got their start during this time, and its mix of different cultures is a huge reason why Europe is so diverse today. So you see, it was so much more than just a chapter in a history book. It was a 1,000-year-long experiment in how to run a society, how to balance power, and how to build a culture. And it fundamentally shaped the Western world. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What parts of our world have these invisible roots stretching all the way back to this sprawling, complicated, 1,000-year empire? You'd probably be surprised.